I think what is going to happen is this. First of all, the defections we've seen to this independent group are only the start of a process. Quite a lot more Labour MPs and a few more Conservative MPs are going to defect. This has probably been arranged and set up in advance, and I imagine that what you're going to see is a steady stream of defections. This is being done for media management purposes. It's to keep the story in the headlines over time. That's how it's actually organised.
Are you saying politicians are behaving cynically?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My word, perish the thought, eh? But yes, unfortunately so. So that's what is going to happen. Now, the context for all these splits in Parliament at the moment is that we can't have a general election because of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which means that you need 2/3 of MPs to vote for a general election. And there's always going to be at least a third of Parliament at the moment who don't want a general election for the good reason that they fear they'll lose their seats. So there isn't going to be a majority for dissolving Parliament at the moment. Plus, you could do it with a no confidence vote, but as recent events have shown, even if the government has lost its majority, there's still a majority who think that they do not want Jeremy Corbyn to be Prime Minister, and so she's not going to lose a confidence vote. So we aren't going to have a general election. At the same time, we have a hard legal deadline for leaving the EU on the 29th of March, and that basically means that Parliament has become a pressure cooker, and all the divisions within the parties are becoming more and more intense, and it's leading both of the parties to fracture and the emergence of quite distinct groups in Parliament, which I think will become the sort of parliamentary wings of two new parties effectively. Certainly one new party, maybe two.
Because it's interesting you're talking about all of this, but there is a party out there that is broadly centrist, pro-Remain.
Yeah.
It's the Liberal Democrats. Why is no one joining the Lib Dems?
That's a very good question, and I think it's partly because they still haven't gotten over the, for them, near fatal experience of being in coalition with the Conservatives. They should have learned from history. Whenever the Labour Party, the Liberal Party rather, has historically gone into coalition or supported one of the other two parties, it's been the kiss of death. And I think they still haven't gotten over that. Plus, they have the problem that they have a number of outstanding MPs, but nobody who's in a really prominent leadership role who ticks that box of really appealing to a wide part of the public.
They don't have any leaders left who are still comfortable with gay sex.
Possibly, yes.
That's the problem that they've got, really, isn't it?
Yes.
So how big is this independent group going to be 2 or 3 months from now, do you think?
I think it could be about 40 to 50 members of Parliament. I would not be surprised. It may be, I would say, we're probably going to see about another 20 Labour MPs leave and another 9 or so Conservative MPs. So several of Tory MPs, like Nick Bowles, have said that they're basically waiting to see how votes go on various Brexit amendments in Parliament. But I think that's pretty much certain. They're not going to go the way he wants them to, and therefore he's going to leave. And I think this is true of quite a number of other MPs. What
role did Brexit play in this? Was it the catalyst, or was this always going to happen?
I think that this realignment was always going to happen, but Brexit was the catalyst. And that's a very good analogy, because in chemistry, a catalyst is a substance that speeds up a reaction but isn't actually involved in the reaction. And that's exactly what Brexit has done. It's made the realignment of British politics around nationalism versus cosmopolitanism happen much more quickly than it otherwise would have done. And Brexit, and how you feel about leave or remain, is a kind of proxy for a whole lot of other issues, issues and feelings about identity. A very revealing poll, you'll find this entertaining perhaps, about Leavers and Remainers was to ask them what their favourite brands were. And the favourite Leavers brands were things like Hovis, Bisto, HP Sauce, Heinz Baked Beans, a whole list of quintessentially 1950s traditional British brands. The favourite brands of Remain voters were things like Uber, Apple, iMac, a whole range of very de jour, modish, trendy brands. That tells you a huge amount, which is that the division between Remain and Leave is actually just the expression of a much deeper, if you like, cultural divide, which is partly a division between old and young, partly between North and the Midlands and the South, partly between professional and university educated and traditional working class or middle class, a whole series of social and cultural divisions like that.
You talk about the divisions. I always try and think, how are we going to heal these divisions?
Well, that's what politics is about. Realignments of this kind take place every 40 years or so. So we had one in the 1880s, 1885 to 1893. We had one in the 1920s, 1922 to 31. We had one in the 1970s and early 80s. Each time you have a realignment, initially politics is very, very bitter. That's because the new issue is one that it's fresh. People are very divided by it. There isn't much centre ground. But what the democratic political process does is that over time, over 10, 20 years or so, the sort of bitterness and starkness of that division is ameliorated. And actually you do get the emergence of a centre.
I'm actually quite excited, like, as someone who's horrified by the extremes on both sides, which seem to have kind of got hold of the microphone recently, and they're the ones that are getting all the attention, both on the left and on the right. I'm quite excited about the idea that you have a new centrist force emerging, on the one hand. On the other hand, I look at the people who are forming this group, and it seems to me like the number one driving force behind their motivation in terms of creating this is really these are people who are vehemently opposed to Brexit. That's what's forced them to leave their parties. And as we were talking just before we started, that's not necessarily a very centrist point of view. So it's a party that's allegedly in the centre, or it's a group for now that's allegedly in the centre, but
it's not, actually.